Today's episode is brought to you by RIMOL Greenhouses.
Whether it's tomatoes to market, flowers in the spring, or your family's harvest, growing in a greenhouse protected from the weather provides the right environment that you need for a harvest that you can count on. RIMOL Greenhouses are designed for durability and offer the quality that you need to grow productively year-round. Visit RIMOLGreenhouses.com to get a quote today.
If I may editorialize for a second, I own a RIMOL tunnel. I love it. We built it ourselves, and I really appreciated the quality of the tunnel as well as the customer service we received in the process, so make sure to check them out. Today's episode is also brought to you by Growing for Market magazine. For 31 years, Growing for Market magazine has been the source of practical ideas and information for direct market vegetable and flower growers. All articles are written by farmers who get their hands dirty and know what they're doing. If you do farmers markets, CSA, farm stand, pick your own, florist sales, or wholesaling, whether you're a commercial grower or want to grow like one, subscribe to Growing for Market for the nitty-gritty details of growing, marketing, and the business of small farming. Available as paper magazine and a digital download with thousands of archived articles available. Use the coupon code WORM, that's WORM, to get 25% off any subscription at growingformarket.com. All right, let's jam. Hey, you all, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to the No-Till Market Garden Podcast, Episode 5, Season 4. Great episode of the podcast for you this week with someone I've wanted to have on for quite a while, Mr. Jeremy Mueller of Commonplace Farm, previously Excelsior Farm. And in that way, we have a conversation about moving farms, about the pressure to get back into production and mitigating that. We talk a little about systems, some about tools and machinery. We also discuss his misadventures with using a flail mower collector to flip beds, which is really interesting. Commonplace is not strictly a no-till farm, but there is still a ton to be learned by the operation that Jeremy and his partner Ashley run out there in Corvallis, Oregon. First, before we get going, some quick updates on where you can find me this winter of 2021. If you would like to catch me out and about, I will be at Acres Eco Ag Conference in Cincinnati next month, and I will be headed to England in January. I'm also doing many good virtual conferences, including the Ecological Farmers of Ontario Conference in early December, where I'm moderating two really amazing no-till conversations for two different scales. And next week, I will give you my England rundown, but Hannah and I will be at Oxford Real Farming Conference, as well as doing an event at Setopia with Carolyn Steele, an event at Oxton Organics with Charles Dowding, and an event at Dartington Trust as well. Dates and details to come, and I'll throw some links in the show notes and keep you updated throughout the winter. Pick up a copy of my book if you have not already. Hats are also for sale now. Both of those things help support our work and keep it free and open to anyone and everyone who wants to listen. And if you want discounts on both of those sorts of things, consider signing up to be a patron at patreon.com/no-till-growers. You also get first dibs on events and merch, but also at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs this week to Kyle Church, Ed West, Julia, Steve Burr, Philip America, Stephen Smith, Ojai Roots, Veggie Cropper, Scott Snodgrass, Jay Mill, Jacob Arthur, Fiona and Donnie of Firefly Farm, and Yannick LaPlante. Big thanks to everyone who supports our work. And enough from me. Let's get into this amazing conversation with Jeremy Mueller of Commonplace Farm. Jeremy Mueller, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Jesse. It's good to be here. Nice to be talking to you today.
Super excited to have you on, Jeremy. Let's see. I'm wondering, maybe let's just start where we always start with this podcast. Maybe give us a little bit of a rundown of the farm, what kinds of crops you're growing and the acreage and those things.
Sure. Yeah. So I guess I'll just give you some of the basics of what we're doing like currently. We can explore anything from there, but I'll just start with like the very basics maybe. I guess my wife and I co-founded a Commonplace Farm, and just 2 years ago we farmed at another farm previously, but the farm's on 24 acres total. We're definitely not using all of it yet, so kind of growing into the space. Corvallis, Oregon. And I guess I would describe our farm as like, to some people, I guess I would say it's a small scale salad farm. But since this is a market garden podcast, if you're coming more from the smaller scale. Like maybe we're a big salad farm, I guess. So yeah, we I guess that's the basics. We're a small scale salad farm. We're a family farm. My wife and I co-own and run it together. We have a daughter who's 5 years old, Marion. So she's around the farm.
Okay, so you said 24 acres total, right? And then how much of that is under production so far? You said you're kind of growing into it, but...
Oh, yeah, sure. So I would say it's kind of in flux right now because the first year we moved on here, we actually leased, which was just last year. We actually leased half the farm, or maybe even a little more, to our neighbors. And they're an organic vegetable farm as well. So we actually shared the property because we knew it was like too much too fast for us to take on the whole farm. So last year we grew 6 acres of crops. This year was like maybe 10. Some of like right now we have a lot of it cover cropped, and we're trying to reduce weed seed by doing some cultivating. I guess you'd call it bare fallow periods and stuff earlier in the season, and different things going on. So I guess that's the simple question is we maybe had about 6 acres in production last year and about 10 acres in production this year, and not super intensive. We weren't like crop after crop after crop like we would at like our old farm, which was much smaller scale, and we kind of had to use every square foot. I'd say here we're kind of like a little more spread out and a little less intensive.
How big was Excelsior Farm? Like, was that, I can't remember really.
So that farm was 4 acres total. And actually recently figured out it was actually a little less than 1.5 acres in production. But basically somewhere around about that.
And you think in the next few years, you'll probably start expanding into the rest of that 24 acres, or at least some of it?
Yeah. At this point, we're only leasing out a couple little corners, kind of odd corners of the farm to our friends and neighbors. And we basically are slowly growing, like, well, not too slowly. I mean, I got 6 acres, 10 acres. Next year, we have 12 acres or 13.5 acres opened up right now, but we may even farm all of that, but we're not going to be growing super intensively like a market garden style on that. So I'd say we're growing into it fairly rapidly. Like, it's 6 times bigger than our old farm, and we're in our 3rd year. I don't know, probably next year and the year after that, we'll just kind of continue to grow into it.
Wow. Was that leap? Like, was that a big learning curve to make a leap like that from 1.5 acres up to, 6 acres and then 10 acres? Like, was that, just learning all the nuances of doing that? Was it a big leap for you? Or did you feel like the scale made sense when you were starting out, depending on the equipment? Or
yeah, I'd say in some ways it's kind of both. Like, I've always had more of a mind to move towards scaling up a bit, even at our old farm, because we looked for a bigger property for basically the whole time we were at the older at Excelsior Farm. So even the systems and things we kind of developed there, it was kind of with the thought of like, maybe we're on 100-foot beds now, but like this same system and these same tools could work on 400-foot beds, or something like that. So, which is what we're on now. So it's funny because I kind of had a thought that we would eventually scale up, and I kind of have always thought like of systems and things that would work on a larger scale. So in some ways, we're actually doing basically the same thing we did at the old farm in some ways. But that's not to say it wasn't a huge leap and with a lot of challenges. Because just like moving a whole farm, the new farm's 45 minutes away from where we were. So the move to get here, like, and purchasing the place. And it was just bare farmland. There wasn't any buildings. There's some field tunnels, but if we had to build a pack house and a greenhouse and things, there's just a lot of challenges and hurdles there, which I think is kind of like obvious, I guess, just moving a farm business and to a whole new city and all that. So I guess I would say it's both. We're also just running into now, like, we really do need to upgrade a lot of our equipment. We kind of like got by these first 2 seasons with taking on some new equipment, but just like some of the bare essentials of what we'd need to scale up to, say, 6 acres or 10 acres. But if we're actually going to have the whole farm in production and do it well, we need to make some pretty big like equipment upgrade purchases or whatever. So those things are kind of on the horizon right now.
When you moved, were you like kind of under pressure to get back in production really quickly, like in terms of your because this is something that we sort of experienced. We had a little bit of a cushion, but we really had to be back in production and back at market by the following spring. So we moved in December, and then we really had to get things flipped in the middle of the winter to get, back into the ground by March and April. And that was really tough. Like, did you all have that same sort of pressure?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It was probably a little different for us because the way that we did it, or the way it happened, was I actually took a full-time job for a year working off farm for a cultivation company.
Mm.
And so the last year at our old farm, we actually scaled our production down to do at less than half production, while I actually worked. So Ashley basically ran the farm, and I mean, I was there, I still worked there too, but we actually scaled that down so that I could work a full-time job. And the way it worked out, we thought it would take longer than it did to find a place, because we had been looking for several years. So we didn't even know how long I'd be working that job. But what it ended up being is I worked that job for almost exactly 1 year, and it ended up that we were able to make that transition to the new farm kind of in that year. So I know that some people follow us on Instagram, and I don't post all the personal details. We have other friends that are on Instagram, and they're really good about giving people the really day-to-day nitty-gritty kind of honest life of farming. I think our Instagram's just more I snap some pretty pictures now and then, and it's more for our customers at this point. So anyways, maybe some people don't know that, but yeah, I actually was working. So I was basically a sales rep for a cultivation equipment company. It's a German one called Colt. They have kind of a U.S. branch, or I was sort of the U.S. the West as their rep for the Western United States.
Oh wow, okay.
Yeah. So I traveled a lot. So that's why when I say Ashley ran the farm, it wasn't I was I was on the road for a week at a time pretty often. I was probably 1/3 of the time I was traveling. So I would be down in Arizona and then come up and then be in California and then out to Colorado and Wisconsin and stuff like that, up into Washington. Or I made a trip out to Germany too. So yeah, so basically working on farms, setting up sort of some small scale farms with more basic tools, but then also some kind of more high tech, camera, computer operated in-row weeders.
Whoa. Yeah, that's interesting. Were they the laser weeders that are shooting whatever it is, thousands of weeds a minute or whatever?
No, yeah. So this would be just more mechanical, physical like hoes, basically,
Oh, okay.
like hoeing equipment. There's kind of a bunch of new ones out right now, but the general idea is it's like a traditional cultivator that would have like sweeps between the rows and stuff. But then there's like a mechanism, like a camera that sees the plants in the rows, and then it automatically hoes in row, because like the in row weeds are the ones that are hard to get right.
Right.
Like you can always like have a sweep go between the rows or even get pretty close to them, but the in row, there's either these mechanical ones with the cameras that hose in between the plants, or there's finger weeders for some applications, or torsion weeders and stuff like that. But so I worked with all those things and basically built and set up and did demonstrations, and and then I went to a lot of what I guess like ag shows or trade show kind of things. Yeah, so that's I was actually doing that. I mean, I still worked on the farm. I still did a lot of the planting and harvesting and stuff like that, but our farm was at like less than half production, so that basically I could work that job, and then it worked out that we found this place and were able to make the transition.
Right, that gave you a little bit of a cushion and not as much pressure to immediately flip into production.
Yeah. So I guess I feel really fortunate that worked out. I thought we kind of thought I'd be working for them longer than I was, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, all right. So I want to get back to the crops for a second, because you kind of mentioned salad. Is it strictly a lot of arugula, lettuce, spinach, those sorts of things, or are you doing tomatoes or anything beyond that, or is it kind of strictly in that greens department?
So I guess there's probably two answers: is what we've grown like in the last 9 years and what we're growing currently. But currently, or I guess I'll preface this with, we've basically grown every vegetable, every kind of normal, and then even some not so normal vegetable crops. So like if it's on the, most CSA farms, you have like 50 different crops going or something. Like we've grown all those crops and maybe even some kind of weirder ones like Belgian endive and stuff. This year we grew fresh herbs, meaning just like herbs planted and harvested as like annual, like cilantro, parsley, and dill. Not so much the perennial herbs and stuff, but so we did herbs, bunching greens, and then we kind of went big with head lettuce this year, which I guess is salad, but it's and then we grow microgreens, and probably the big heavy hitter for us is our baby leaf salad crops, which would be kind of split between direct sown, baby leaf brassicas, and spinach, and then transplanted like multi-leaf lettuce. So that's everything we did this year. We've basically never had one year the same as the last, which isn't my preference, but it's just the way it's been for us. I think we really will settle into a more, as we're here on the new farm and get really settled in and stuff, I think we will settle into where we have maybe one year be more similar to the last.
So what's determining that? I mean, this maybe is a marketing question, but like, is the market sort of determining that, or is it kind of a preference on what you're growing in your equipment?
Yeah. So the first, I think I can sort of split up our farming endeavor, and I say I mean like Ashley and me. Mm-hmm. It's like the first 4 years or so, we were just like a small scale market garden, doing kind of like maybe what's for some people the typical kind of marketing is like CSA farmers market, and what some people would say wholesale or direct store delivery. So we did those three things, and we did it with 40 or 50 crops. And And it was kind of actually when Marion was born, our daughter, so 5 years ago. That's what really kind of like, Ashley and I were like, this is cool. We're kind of making it work, but we were just like feeling like we really, especially with having a child and with Ashley doing more care of Marion in our situation than me, and like me doing more of the farm work and her doing more of, taking care of Marion and doing other things too. At that was kind of the point at which we were like, how can we streamline and simplify what we're doing on the farm rather than growing these 40 or 50 different crops. So I can almost just basically point back to her birth. That was like the last year, like that, after she was born, we did CSA. We kind of finished out some CSA stuff just because we had made commitments to people who had bought shares and stuff. And we're like, okay, let's do this one more season, but like, let's also start transitioning to like a more specialized operation. So for us, that was that decision. And that changed our marketing outlets quite a bit because we quit doing CSA 1 year, then we quit doing farmers market another year. I forget which one came first in that, and then we just started doing a lot more selling to grocery stores. Basically, we just kind of started doing more and more salad greens. And I mean, I guess it wasn't this 1 year, but it basically, we just started doing more and more of those every season. And it basically took over we stopped doing CSA and market. And at this point, that's all we do is we do the crops I mentioned. Like this year, for example, we deliver twice a week to like 45 grocery stores. And that's like all our customers. We do work with restaurants too, but that's been spotty, obviously, with the pandemic and everything. So we also have a handful of, maybe we work with like 5 to 10 restaurants, like typically, or we'll get back to doing that.
Yeah. Okay. So let's get technical for a minute because I'm kind of curious. If you're doing 45 grocery stores, how are they getting a fresh sheet? Is it a fresh sheet? Is it like contracted? How does that, what does that look like?
So that looks like in our, I mean, with what we're doing right now, it's not super technical. I actually send out the fresh list or availability list, whatever you want to call it, to them a couple of days ahead of when they need to, or a day ahead of when they need to order. And then they place their orders. That's an emailed thing. So I kind of have like a little, I mean, I like to include like a picture or two from the farm, and our fresh list looks like a nice little menu kind of thing you'd have from like a fancy restaurant. It's like has the item and then like the prices, there, all the prices there, and try to make it look nice and stuff. But yeah, it's just an email that they get twice a week, and then they have like that day or the next. So basically, I have 2 days to place their order. And Ashley basically takes it from there because all the responses actually go to her. And then anyone who, oftentimes she will make some calls because like everyone doesn't always get their email in. So that's kind of the way Ashley does all the sales, and she runs the pack house. And I guess you could call it like she does all the like order from fulfillment, basically, like kind of takes it from there.
So then she puts together a sort of pick list for you, a harvest list. Does that have a specific format, or is it kind of, just a basic sheet with like a spreadsheet, or what does that look like?
There's probably 2 systems here. Like one is kind of our baby leaf salad greens, which is on more of a system of like, we just because we sell like a pretty consistent amount every week, week in and week out, we can basically stock the fridge. So like with a certain amount of each product, and we know we're going to basically sell through that much. So we actually just have a fridge inventory. And at the end of the day, Ashley like tallies up what we've got. And so the harvest crew can like just walk in, look at that, and just top. It's like, oh, we need, 200 pounds of baby kale mix and, 300 pounds of lettuce and this, like, and that of like all the different products to just stock up the fridge so that when Ashley's selling, she just has basically like, a freshly harvested amount in the fridge that's like ready to be packed up for orders. And that stuff would get, when it's brought in, it's like brought in and washed and then put in the washed and dried and then put in the fridge. So she's just got this like, stock in the fridge. And that's the way. So basically, like, as long as they're doing the fridge inventory and as long as we have the greens in the field, that's almost automatic. Like, people just walk in, like, at 5:30 in the morning for a harvest crew. And it's just like, they'll just, sometimes they take a picture of it with their cell phone and share it on a group text so everyone knows like how many pounds of everything we need to harvest. So that's like fairly automatic. And then the other items are more just like Ashley's going to give us a best guess, like in real time. She's like actually will be like selling the stuff in the pack house. Like she'll be on the phone or doing emails, and we'll have this is probably like not the best. I'm sure there's like cooler high tech ways of doing this, but we just have a group text going all morning and she's like, 5 more cases of red leaf and 7 of these, and like, oh, can you add 2 of these on? Kind of in real time. And that would be for the head lettuce and the bunching greens and the herbs. That's kind of what we did this season. So, yeah.
Okay, that's great. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about some of the harvesting tools and techniques that you're using. Maybe let's start with an approach to harvesting head lettuces. I know that you have a really good baby greens harvester, and I want to talk about that, but I want to talk about some of the some of the lettuces and bunching kales and that sort of, or bunching greens and that sort of stuff, because I think those are maybe some of the more complex in terms of like being efficient about it. What's sort of the technique or approach to that?
Gosh, it's a good question. I don't know if I'm the best person to answer it, but so we haven't actually done bunching greens in years.
Oh, okay.
And we just kind of got back to it this season. And we've never actually grown like full size head lettuce in like a meaningful way, like almost ever. Because even for our CSA, we mostly did baby greens and stuff. So this was kind of like a big leap into that. Like we're like, oh, let's bring back bunching greens, because we felt like this, all the stores we talked to, we basically asked them, like, what do you guys want? And they were saying head lettuce and bunching greens. And we were like, okay, like, we'll do that. That sounds good. So, I mean, our process, we were probably doing, so there's 4 people on the harvest crew and then 5 if I'm working with them, which I did most this season. I'm kind of tapering off here to try to get to some other things. But, well, I guess I'll start with saying that the best harvest efficiencies is almost before the harvest, is just like bed prep, transplanting really well, cultivating really well. So like the crop is really healthy and really clean and free of weeds. Like you don't want to be hunting for head lettuce. You want to be able to just like cut down the row, just like chop, there's a head, chop, there's a head, chop, there's a head. Like, and basically what we're mostly doing is we'll have 2 cutters working down a bed. So there's 4 rows on our system here. We're on 60-inch beds. That's like center to center.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So I guess when you start working with tractors, there's like a small difference between market garden. The way market gardeners talk about beds, they mostly talk about like I have a 30-inch bed, but that's referring to like the bed top. But like in a tractor system, you would say I have 60-inch beds, and that's center of one wheel track to the center of the other, or the center of one bed to the center of the other bed.
Yeah.
So anyway, so with 60-inch beds, center to center, we have 4 rows. So that means like 2 cutters can cut, like if each person cuts 2 rows in front of them. So it's fairly ergonomic. Like you don't have to like overextend your back to like get too far out. It's like they're just cutting and laying those down, and you're kind of shooting to like cut them high, like at the right point where they're clean. And then we're field packing those. So then the person would be coming behind that with boxes. They're like waxed cardboard boxes on the harvest cart, and literally just like packing cases. And then those would just go, and you're trying to kind of keep everything as clean as possible and stuff. And then that would just go right into the walk-in fridge when we'd bring in like a pallet. So at the end of the row, we'd have the tractor waiting with like forks on the front and back, and be kind of assembling pallets of head lettuce.
So are there occasions when you have to wash those lettuce heads?
There's a few cases, but I think with us, to be able to sell them like wholesale to grocery stores and kind of hit a price point that works, it's almost like you have to grow it clean enough and nice enough to be able to harvest it and bring in like, pallets or a pallet or 2 of head lettuce. It's like once you have to start harvesting it all, bring it in, dunking it, and that's like probably doubles the labor that it takes for a case of lettuce. And we have done that. Like, for example, last year we had these terrible wildfires here, and our whole field got coated with ash. Uh-huh. So we had to actually wash all the head lettuce and just everything a lot more. But basically, like, your profit margin nearly disappears, I think. So, like, for the added work and labor, like doubling the labor for a case of lettuce or something. So we kind of try to grow it. We don't push it super like late into the shoulder seasons. Like, for example, it's our last 2 weeks of production now. I mean, as of now, this is October
21st. Yep.
Yeah. So just for if it's recorded and aired later, but we're actually out of this morning was our very last field harvest of baby leaf greens, but we already stopped doing head lettuce a few weeks back, because we don't like, it's like that has to be a really nice clean crop, and once there's maybe mildew or issues and things, just because it starts raining and getting cold and stuff, we'll actually just quit doing head lettuce, or that's what we did this season, is kind of when it's still at that really high quality where we can go out and harvest it really efficiently and really have really nice product.
What's the per head price, generally speaking, if you don't mind sharing?
Oh, sure. So there's two prices I could think of. One would be like direct store delivery. So we're then acting as the grower, harvester, packer, distributor. Like, we're kind of doing everything and delivering it right to the grocery store. So that price is like $30 to $34 a case, and they're 24 count cases. So there's 24 heads in a box. So my brain at this point in the season, my brain's a little addled. So you'd have to do the math yourself there, but like 30 to 34, depending on if it's leaf lettuce. Like, leaf lettuce is typically $30 a case. Butterheads, like red and green butterheads, are like more harder to grow and get a little better price, like $34 a case.
So it's like between $1.25 and $1.40.
Yeah. So a lot less, obviously, than you'd get at farmer's market or something. But I guess since we're it seems to make sense. And like I said, we've never done head lettuce. We've never grown as much head lettuce as we did this season. So, but that's the price we'd get for direct store delivery. And it might go up or down a little bit, and there's different, but yeah, that's like ballpark, something like that. And then if we sold it to a distributor who would then sell it to a grocery store, which we also did this season, then it would be more like basically $1 a head, like it's $25 a
Yeah, okay. I mean, that's not, especially on your scale. Do you feel like when you put that to pen and paper that it works out that you're making good profit on that? Do you know vaguely what the profit margin? Yeah.
I guess I'm kind of, we learned a lot this season, just like varieties to grow and slots in the season, spring, summer, fall, and different things. So lots, and also like the harvest, like it wasn't super efficient. Like, I don't know, there's other things we could do probably to make it better. But yeah, I think the numbers work. I mean, we made profit this year, so I guess something's working. Yeah. It's not wildly profitable, but I think it's just pretty similar to pretty similar to the other crops we grow. Since this is the first year we kind of grew a lot more head lettuce, I really don't even actually know, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't really run all the numbers, and but it felt like it was working out pretty well this year. So,
hey, you all, just jumping in here real quick to get a word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by BCS America. BCS two-wheel tractors are designed and built in Italy, where small-scale farming has been a way of life for generations. Discover the beauty of BCS on your farm with PTO-driven implements for soil working, shredding cover crop, spreading compost, mowing under fences, clearing snow, and more, all powered by a single gear-driven machine that's tailored to the size and scale of your operation. To learn more, view sale pricing, or locate your nearest dealer, visit bcsamerica.com. That's bcsamerica.com. Today's episode is also brought to you by Farmers Web. Farmers Web software gives you the tools you need to manage your entire sales process. Built specifically for farmers' needs, Farmers Web helps you to save time, reduce errors, increase efficiency, and provides flexibility for working seamlessly with your whole customer base. Visit farmersweb.com to schedule a demo, try their free account or a 1-month free trial of their paid accounts, and don't forget to check out their free how-to guides on selling online to individual buyers, as well as how to work with such buyers as restaurants, schools, and stores at www.farmersweb.com. All right, back to the show. So maybe let's talk about baby greens. What are you using to do baby greens? Like, what's the harvest equipment that you have for that?
So for baby leaf greens, we're using a bandsaw harvester to harvest them. It's basically kind of on a small scale, or like a market garden scale, it could probably seem like this crazy, machine. It's actually, the one we have is like an Ortomec harvester. So it's made in Italy, and we bought it through a distributor that works with them, Sutton Ag. But it's kind of like the entry level, like bottom rung, like harvester that hooks up to the back of a tractor, and it's fairly simple in a lot of ways. I mean, it's like a bandsaw, and it's run by hydraulics. So it's like, we've had like bandsaws and hydraulics since like the ancient Egyptians or something. So it's not like actually, there's no like lasers involved or anything. But it's like a blade, a bandsaw blade that cuts just above you can raise or lower the height of it, but it'll cut just above the bed top. And then kind of immediately following that blade is just a conveyor, meaning just like a belt that the greens fall on. They ride up this belt and they just fall into the harvest totes.
Is that belt driven by the wheels, or is that a Pete, what's driving that belt?
It's a hydraulic motor.
Okay, so
So
the
it's
motors, yeah.
so that both the motor that runs the bandsaw and the motor that runs the conveyor, and then also the motor that would run the hydraulics that lift or lower the blade. Those are all run off like basically a circular system, like oil, like hydraulic fluid runs through all these hoses, and that hooks up to a little, it's called a roller pump, and that actually just basically you stick that on your power takeoff, your PTO, like on the back of the tractor. So that turns the pump and pumps fluid through this system that then runs like all the little motors. And you can set them like the blade faster, slower, or the conveyor faster or slower, and go up and down and stuff. But it's all controlled by pressurized oil. I guess that's how the hydraulics work. It's kind of nice because you can basically run it off any tractor that has a PTO, and it's kind of plug and play that way. It's pretty simple.
And then that goes up the conveyor and then drops into bins behind the conveyor. Is that kind of how you pick up those greens?
Yeah, exactly. Yep. It's pretty, so ours is pretty straightforward. It's just like the harvest bins are right under that. It rides up the conveyor and just falls into the harvest bins, and we fill up, like when the bins are full, we put empty ones and keep on filling them up. But I guess in a more complex system, you'd have like basically kind of a sifting thing after that would sift out any like small pieces or cotyledons. But that's kind of like maybe the next step or something, the next step up.
And then is this kind of the same way with the lettuce? You're not having to necessarily wash this, generally speaking?
Oh, actually this would be totally different. Yeah, this would need to be all washed, and then spun dry. At least that's the way we're doing it right now. So yeah, bringing in that, so all that comes into the pack house, and it all gets washed, and then basically spun dry in spinners, which at this point is just modified washing machines. And then it would get crated up and chilled, like in the fridge after getting dried. And that also lets it dry off a little bit more while it's chilling down to temp in the fridge. And then it would be taken out of the fridge for just a minute to get packaged and then put back in the fridge. So that way, it's normally best to chill greens down to the temp you want to hold them at before you package them, because then you have less condensation problems and stuff in whatever sort of packaging you might use.
What about bugs and that sort of thing? Like, I know sometimes in baby greens that can be an issue. What's the management there?
So a lot of the baby greens we do are brassicas, and as I'm sure most of your listeners know, you like flea beetles are just like, they love them. So our approach is we just cover all the brassica baby leaf greens with insect netting and bury like all the edges. Like basically right after seeding, I try to get, one or two irrigation, like water it a couple of times, because it waters more evenly before you put netting on. And then we'll throw the netting on, and then the netting will just be on until like literally like the day before, like the evening before, or even the morning we harvest. We'll just pull off all the netting and pick up the hoops and then harvest. So that's the way we handle flea beetles. We're kind of leaning towards, we didn't grow much spinach this year for the simple reason that there's so much more weed pressure on the new farm that we just weren't able to. And this would be baby leaf, like mechanically harvested spinach. But we're even leaning towards like our spinach just gets kind of hammered by cucumber beetles, like the 12-spot ones, not the Japanese ones. I don't know. There's probably more technical way of saying that, but we just call them 12-spot cucumber beetles. There's just like these brief periods of the season where they like hatch out, and like we'll have just like one succession or something get really hammered. So I'll keep an eye on like when they're going to hatch out, and like try to stay ahead of that. And we'll just cover those with insect netting as well. And then I guess lettuce, we really don't have too much trouble with pests, except for aphids in the tunnels at the end of the season. But we kind of just try to keep things lively, keep them like moving fast, like can keep planting, keep harvesting, and have those crops as healthy and grow as fast as possible. But I guess to stay ahead of aphids, like we don't try not to let things like languish and hang out for a really long time.
Right. Are you, last year I feel like you were using a flail mower collector. Are you still playing with that?
Yeah. So that's kind of a funny story. So we had this, or I should say I'll have to take the blame for it. But I had this whole idea I'd been thinking about for a couple of seasons that I just couldn't get out of my mind. And it's fairly simple. Is since my background, like I'm kind of coming from the small scale market gardening. I mean, that was the scale of our old farm. And even though I worked on the larger farm before that, just briefly, I still kind of, in many ways, do think sometimes like a market gardener scale grower. And I just remember, if you have a bed in a hoop house that you really just need to flip it and replant it like that day, because you're like, we've got transplants, or, we need to get the next succession of baby leaf in or something. You just end up being like, okay, I'll just like stir up hoe off the surface, basically rake it up. And rather than like trying to till that in, or if you're no-till, do like tarp it or do something that takes time for things to decompose in place. It's just like you just haul it away to the compost pile, and then maybe you put down some amendments and stuff and like replant it immediately. So I was like, why don't we try to do that? Like just like mechanize that. So basically this flail mower, it's like a catch flail mower is what it sounds like. Is it's just a flail mower that actually like it mows, but it actually catches it has like a large hopper that fills up with whatever it is you're mowing. So what I did is I had like these kind of extra heavy hammer blades put on it, or it's like an option when you buy when we were purchasing it. And I thought, this is a heavy and strong enough machine with these hammer blades, especially, that I can just skim off the top of the beds without, and basically do the same thing you do on a small scale, but that you would be really manual, like work that like wouldn't be an option. For example, if you're clearing like a quarter acre or a half acre or an acre of beds. So we actually were doing an equipment loans for some other things, and I kind of just snuck that in on that loan. And so we did and bought this machine. And it's funny because I'd say it's both like a big success in some ways, or I don't even know, big success. I'd say it's both a success, and we also decided to like not continue doing it. So I guess the reason it was a success is because like mechanically it worked really well. We just skimmed off the top of the bed, hauled away the whatever the dregs, that whether it was like whatever the crop was. Mostly we did this with baby leaf salad green beds, and we were able to prep it same day and plant it, like replant it. So we'd say we're moving from brassica baby leaf greens to transplanted lettuce or to spinach or something. So just like flip it from one thing to another, same day. So that was pretty cool because I always feel like when, even in a tillage system, we do a lot of just kind of shallow tillage, definitely not no-till, but we do a lot of that. But it's like you really want to let stuff decompose and before you would seed, especially if you're direct sowing your next crop and stuff. So there's always like a gap there, but I was like, man, we could really just fly through it. And then the idea would be to take that and compost it and come up with like a high quality compost if you could do it well. And how we planned to do that was we grow a lot of microgreens. So we go through like, say, a little more than a yard a week of potting soil, which we would kind of be the brown, if you will, of like the compost, the brown and green, the carbon and nitrogen.
Mm-hmm.
So we would skim off the top crop and have this super like nitrogen, like heavy, plant, juicy plant matter. And the idea was that we'd figure out how to get the right ratios and come up with a composting system to then mix that with a fair amount of potting soil that we're using anyway. And then it was like this way that we could then put that back on the field. So it's just like taking the decomposition process of crops decomposing in place and like bringing it into this intentional system that we could come up with a high quality amendment that would then go back, and we could like close the window between crops while also not like losing that nutrient and stuff. So that was the idea. And it seemed like such a cool idea. I just was really into it. So we did it. But the reason we're not going to keep doing that is, number one, I really didn't, moving a whole farm and setting up infrastructure and all this stuff, I really didn't set up a composting system for it. So first of all, like, we didn't really have a good way of handling that. We have a bucket loader on one of the tractors and stuff, but we didn't really have like I'm not a compost maker. Like I would love the idea of having like a super awesome composting system on farm, but I don't. So we're not there yet. So that was one problem, is like we would haul off. So I guess I'll say that was one problem. The other problem was that it's actually a lot more green matter like than I anticipated pulling it off of a bed. So it'd be like more than one big hopper full. And it was also a lot juicier. Like it's like a juicer, like the machine that we actually called it the greens machine. And like we call it because it's green colored. It's made by a Italian company called Peruso. Anyway, so it's a lot, like there's a lot of water content and a lot of, so we'd be like skimming off the tops of these beds, and like literally there's like gallons and gallons of this like super nitrogen rich like juice just like pouring out of the bottom of the machine, which is like leaving these weird trails of juice like on the beds. And then like sometimes I'd see them kind of starting to like get like where the juices all would be like so nitrogen rich that we have like inconsistencies on the bed or like moldy places. So I just felt like, and so if it's more than one load per bed, I guess it was maybe a scale issue coming from a small scale farm, like a smaller scale farm. I didn't think through like if it's more than one load per bed, then like I'm gonna have to drive like it's almost a mile around the perimeter of our farm now, like at the new farm. So like depending on where the compost pile would be in relation to where we're pulling this stuff off, if we're doing like 10 beds and it's more than a trip to the compost pile per bed, it would literally be someone just basically driving the tractor around in circles like half the day,
right? Like
enough to pick up the stuff, then to drive over and deliver it and then just drive back. And so I was like, oh wait, so maybe we close the gap between crops. But that sounds cool, but really to just have somebody like running a big loud machine and driving in circles all the time, it started to feel like maybe just having it decompose in place and having space between crops is just fine. And the other thing is we're not short on land here, so it's not like I have to flip these beds immediately to get more crops in. So it was kind of this mix of me thinking like a super small scale farmer, but then like moving on to a bigger farm and being like, oh, wait a minute, like it's a lot of driving, it's a lot of, diesel, running the tractor, running this machine, and then we still have to compost it. So it seems to me like it just added like all of these other inefficiencies that I hadn't really thought through. Whereas like the tool kind of did what I thought it would do, but the system didn't work as well.
Right. So on maybe shorter beds on a smaller farm, that's a system that could be applicable, but on your scale, it was just didn't quite balance out.
Yeah. And I thought I would really dig into like getting to be a better compost maker and all that. But realistically, like we're doing concrete work, we're building the barn, we're building greenhouses and putting in gas lines and electrical lines and all kinds of things that I was like, that just wasn't like possible for me to take on these first couple of seasons on a new farm. So we actually sold it to a guy who used it to in his nut orchard, like chestnuts or filberts or something. He'll like clean up the leaves and mow it really close to the ground so that he can harvest nuts better and stuff. So it's sort of this, it's an interesting idea, and it was interesting to try it out. And then we're not doing it anymore.
Yeah. I spoke with Jan Heinrich Crop in the beginning of last season, I think. And he talked about using a flail mower collector on basically like cover cropped plots. I forget. I mean, it was like clover and those sorts of things. And he would mow that, and then he would take a compost spreader and he would spread it like a mulch over other plots. And I thought that was really creative.
Oh, cool. Yeah. And I guess probably flail mowing other things like grasses and cover crop, like legumes and things. I mean, maybe it's a lot. You end up with more like haylage, kind of a thing rather than just like juiced green.
Right.
Because it was like it was like soup, like this nasty soup. Yeah, and then if you didn't mix that with enough, potting soil or carbonaceous material, it would just like stink, and like overnight it would just smell terrible. Because it's so like nitrogen rich, anaerobic yuckiness happening.
Right.
So that was a little bit humbling because I was like, this is it. This is the next big thing. It's going to be awesome. And I was like, oh, I'm not as smart as I thought I was. But well.
Yeah. But in terms of like the efficacy of it actually terminating that previous crop, did you feel good about, are you still using a flail mower?
Yeah. So that was we just have like a deck mower, like a old deck mower that we use for just mowing things. That doesn't fully terminate stuff, and we don't have I probably should have just bought a normal flail mower instead of that one, but we don't actually have a normal flail mower. It's on the list, but a lot of things are on the list right now. So
I totally get that. Is it so in your bed flips now? Are you doing a mowing and then directly seeding a few days later, or giving it some time, or are you kind of doing it and then doing a shallow tillage and then seeding later?
Yeah, so we are doing like shallow tillage, basically following. If we harvest and we get to it right away, we can just skip the mowing because like the harvester, harvested it down to like half an inch above the bed top or something. So that works pretty nice if like, go out in the morning and harvest, and like in the afternoon just skim till those beds. And that's how we would terminate all the baby leaf greens. That's how we do it ideally. If we don't get to it for a week or two, it kind of regrows and it's big enough that then we'll mow it and then do that. But so you get the idea. It's basically pretty simple. We just, I guess it's not maybe the best thing to say on a no-till podcast, but we just till it. But I guess no, I wouldn't like defend it as being like no, like low till or no, or anything. But we're mostly just like tilling like 4 inches or so deep with like a reverse tine tiller. That's like slightly more gentle than maybe a forward tine tiller, and it has like a grate that kind of sifts, like pushes the like clumps or like trash, meaning like the plant matter, kind of like it tends to kind of sift that out to where the fine dirt goes through the grate, and then the plants and like dirt clods will get buried under it, so that it's basically like what we have is like the cheap version of like one of those stone barrier tillers.
Oh yeah.
That's basic. Yeah. It's another, yeah, really, we probably need to upgrade our tillage equipment, but yeah, that's what we use this year.
Okay.
So basically we would till it to terminate it, and then it would decompose and probably give it a couple of weeks, because we're not in like a huge hurry to replant necessarily, because we do have a little more space. And I guess staying more in that like top 4 inches or so, that limits our seed bank, like more than if we were tilling really deep. Like we're just kind of contending with like the weed seeds within that top 4 inches, which is still a lot on the new farm. But and then we would ideally pre-irrigate it once that's died down enough that nothing's going to like come back to life as far as the crop or weeds that might have been tilled, so that we can start germinating in kind of a flush of weeds, ideally, depending on the weather and stuff. It all kind of changes, but we would pre-sprout a flush of weeds. And then basically at that point, we would then drop, like with the pre-sprouted weeds hanging out, we would just like drop any amendments right on the bed tops where the bed tops will be.
Are you doing that by hand, or what's your system for that?
Oh, we just use a drop spreader.
Okay.
For like any sort of granular amendment, or fertilizer or gypsum or lime or kelp or whatever it happens to be. Just kind of based on soil tests and stuff. So so that's how we put that down. And then we would just power harrow that. So like the amendments are getting mixed in while the pre-sprouted weeds are getting killed. And that would be then ready, within, I try to do that the day before. So then the next day when we're either seeding or transplanting into those beds, it's just like ready, like it's kind of ready to go.
I'm just curious, like, is there a function of that reverse tine tiller that is more efficacious for terminating that previous crop? Like, what's the thinking there?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So there's a lot of, even though it's just baby leaf greens and they're cut pretty close to the ground, it's still too much trash for the power harrow to like, it just ends up like with these little like balls of like baby leaf green like roots and plants kind of like stuck up in it. And it doesn't, in my experience, unless you try to set it really deep, which is like a little more than that machine seems to be made to handle, it doesn't actually kill to like terminate it. Like you definitely have some regrowth. And so I'm tilling as shallow as makes sense for me, kind of in my context, I feel, and I added gauge wheels to the back of the tiller so I can set the depth of it a lot more precisely than just like a drag tiller. That's just like on skis, basically.
That makes sense. I mean, it was like you were explaining with the sifter.
Yeah, but with the tiller, I do get, like, it does terminate it all. So it's just basically, like just comes down to like I couldn't really terminate it with the power harrow, and with it being like more of a mixing action, it's like you have to go a lot slower and stuff. Yeah, so I just basically kind of skim till it to kill it, and then it's like amendments and pre-irrigating it, assuming it's dry, or something out. And then I like using the power harrow as the last thing because it also like really levels the bed, which if we're going to direct sow for baby leaf greens, obviously if we're going to bandsaw harvest it, that bed top needs to be like basically totally level. So that's a system we've come up with so far. It's far from perfect. I guess I would say we use a fair amount of tillage. I guess my general thought about it is I'm normally keeping my eye on for soil health, like as this mechanized system relates to soil health. I think I would just say I normally have my eye on two main things, and that's just like soil organic matter and weed seed bank, I guess I'd say. And I always want to see like the organic matter being maintained or built, like, gaining it. And I always want to see the weed seed bank getting less every year. And that's kind of like my two biggest factors that would make our farm sustainable, I guess. Or I don't know what, there's a lot of definitions of what that might mean. But it makes it like viable because like we can't grow, like we lost a lot of salad greens moving to the new farm because it's too weedy. And, in like our old farm, the weed seed bank was over 7 years. We got it to a point where like it was negligible. Like there was very few weeds. So I think using these methods is not like what I wouldn't necessarily like recommend them or not for anybody else, but that's what I'm thinking of is like within those top 4 inches, I really want to be getting less and less weeds, like pre-sprouting and terminating weeds all the time. And then, but I want to be also building organic matter. And I guess maybe one of the reasons I feel okay about using tillage in the way that we are is that at our last farm, when we left that property, our organic matter was at 8%.
Wow.
And we started at 5%. And we only did one pretty decent like compost application, like within those 7 years. So I don't even know how to account for it, because it doesn't seem like it would have been raising like from 5% to 8% in the field. Like our tunnels were like at like 12% because we put a lot of compost in there and stuff. But my only thought is like we were like when you plant baby leaf greens, just a blanket of plants,
Mm-hmm.
And then I guess just cycling those over and over, like we started to just get less and less weeds because we're just, pre-sprouting and killing and then growing. Even in a brassica baby leaf crop, there'll be some weeds that sprout in the understory, but they're still low enough that you can harvest over them. And so it's like we're just kind of constantly growing out those weeds, that weed seed bank, and getting rid of it. I mean, not completely. There was always some weeds. And then our organic matter, I have no idea how to account for that because we did some cover cropping, a little bit of composting, but mostly we just like grew like brassica baby leaf greens, spinach greens, lettuce greens, and then cover cropped. And we're like quadruple cropping a lot of the farm, like with those in that order, and just over and over. And like, I guess, I mean, if we're at 8%, that doesn't sound that bad. So.
And you were largely using that same sort of method of flipping the bed too at that time?
Yeah. Actually, we're using the same tool still. That's why I say we kind of need to upgrade some of it because, yeah, we actually use the same tiller with the gauge wheels on it that I used at the old farm and the same power harrow. And we were actually doing the same thing with a BCS before we got our little what's now our little tractor. But yeah, we were doing the same thing with that. We're like the same power harrow and the same skim tilling it and stuff. So but it wasn't the whole 7 years we were there. It was probably that 5 years since like Marion was born that we really started converting the farm into doing that.
That makes sense though. I mean, if you think about like, in terms of you're growing the soil organic matter, you're putting an enormous number of roots in there. And then you're going no deeper than 4 inches, and your average root zone is like 4 to 6, 4 to 8 inches. So the majority of your roots are below where you're actually hitting. So every time you flip a crop, you plant a crop and flip it, you're leaving an enormous amount of roots in there. So it makes sense that you would grow the soil organic matter. I think a lot of people are kind of scared at the idea of, touching those first few inches, but the majority of your soil life and your soil roots are down there closer to that 4, 6, 8 inch range, depending on what kind of crops you're growing and how long they're growing. I would think baby greens is probably closer to 4 to 6, but depends on the crop maybe.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm not an expert on it at all. Like, and I mean, you just wrote a book about this stuff. So I won't really claim to know more than that, but that's basically, I mean, I guess even within this, maybe it's a shallow tillage system, or I don't know what you would call it, but it seems to be working fine, like good enough that I'm okay with it. And we're kind of going to just do that for now, and maybe someday we change. But yeah.
Are you using anything else for weed management? Are you doing any flame weeding, or is it you like this system and that's kind of the most effective thing you found?
Yeah. So, I guess I would say for weed management, the tools kind of in our tool belt is maybe this shallow tillage, cover cropping, bare fallow kind of periods where maybe it's even just a block where we grow weeds out and terminate them. And then we do, so for the transplanted crops, I would do the bed prep like we've already talked about, and then we would transplant into those beds. We do then, like on the new farm, there's extremely high weed pressure. And so we then would cultivate twice mechanically with a tractor pulled cultivator. That's fairly precise for like there's a person on the back who steers it and gets it just as close to the row and in the row as possible. So we would hit it probably at least twice with that for, say, transplanted lettuce. And then we're still having to do quite a bit of in-row cultivating just manually with hoes, like hoeing in between plants. So it's on our old farm. I think we didn't have the tractor mounted cultivator because we weren't really on the scale that it would make sense. But I think we had the weed pressure low enough after those years that like we could probably get away with just using the cultivator behind the tractor, but we didn't. Yeah. So if that makes sense, like I think we will eventually get to the point where we could just make two passes with the tractor cultivator. You worked as a cultivator rep. Is there anything you're eyeing that feels like it would be beneficial to that system, like finger weeders versus some of those sweeps that you were talking about? Is there one that you're like, this is what my system needs? I think so. We have torsion weeders, which are like basically these little wire things that kind of like try to work in row with, and you set them tense enough that like they hopefully won't kill your crop or like rip it out, but will rip out those thread stage weeds. So we use those on our cultivator. They're from a company in the Netherlands that's like Havelar, like anyway. But that's not important. But basically, the torsion weeders we use a lot. I don't prefer using finger weeders for lettuce. We have tight enough spacing. It's actually pretty hard to fit them in. We kind of can get away with it with the smallest finger weeder sizes, but I kind of like we use the torsion weeders the most, and I don't like switching them all out all the time, so we just kind of stick with that. But the in-row weeders at the moment, which would be the ones that like go between each plant, mechanically they like see it with the camera and they go between each plant. That's basically what we're having to do manually. So we have, the field crew, the 4 of them out there oftentimes just like hoeing between the plants. So having one of those might make sense someday if we continue to grow a lot of transplanted lettuce crops. But I mean, they're extremely expensive. They're coming down in price now because there's a lot of competition in that market. There's like 6 different companies that make them now, and they're all trying to kind of one up each other. And so anyway, all that to say is there may come a day where it makes sense for us to have an in-row, what they would just refer to as like an in-row weeder, which would have those cameras and go in between the plants. But that's probably a ways out.
Well, very cool. Jeremy Mueller, this has been an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's been a pleasure talking with you, Jesse.
All right. If you enjoyed that episode, make sure to give Commonplace Farm a follow on Instagram. I love their Instagram. It's got lots of interesting stuff on it, and all the other places. You can check out the links in the show notes. Pick up a copy of my book, The Living Soil Handbook, if you have not already. Also remember that hats are available as I write this. I don't know for how long. The Patreon members gobbled up a big chunk of our inventory, which was kind of the point. But anyway, they are around right now. Winners Growers podcast is fully in season 2 right now, with my buddy Pavel Ovechkin being the latest episode. Great stuff. Find that wherever you find podcasts. Make sure you are subscribed to this podcast wherever you are getting it and leave a review. But this week, all reviews must give me some tips on how to deal with doing a podcast when you have a head cold. Anyway, big thanks as always to Jackson Roulette, my partner at No Till Growers, for all of his work for sending a bazillion hats and books out into the world this year. Thanks to Josh Satin for all his help behind the scenes. The big thanks to Willie Breeding for the theme music. And biggest thank you ever to Hannah Crabtree for being amazing. Thank you all for listening. We'll see you next week. Bye.